You know, I'm not over Nipsey Hussle's death. I'm not. I'm not over Ermias Hashikadum's death. Okay, because you just can't lay it down like that. No, we know he's in a better place, in a better existence, in a better existence, in a better realm, but it's just wrong for those who think they were achieving their goal of removing him from planet Earth. It's just wrong. So I want to take you back to where all this began. Yes, way back. We're talking 3,500 years ago and more. Okay? And you want to know, how is that possible that she can relate this to 3,500 years ago and over 3,500 years ago? But yes, I can. I'm not a historian, but I've done many research over my years, and I want to drop some knowledge, okay? So basically, the purpose of all the prophets that God sent, his prophets, to mankind was to help mankind. We know that. We can all agree with that, okay? And this also is going to answer why some people are atheists, which they have no real reason to be atheists, but it's understandable why they become atheists with all the lies and agenda. But that doesn't take away from the fact that our Creator exists, right? So it's not a good enough reason to become atheist. It's a good enough reason to become atheist for mankind version of the truth, but not a good enough reason to become atheist completely and shut down and cut off the truth. But I want to say this. Let's go back over 3,500 years ago. We know that Abraham talked to God 3,500 years ago. So before Abraham, there was already a lot of controversy in Egypt. Because see, Egypt was the world's superpower. Just like everybody comes to America for an opportunity, Egypt was that place over 3,500 years ago for a long time. Religion was known to mankind ever since Moses, not even ever since Abraham, but ever since Moses. Because see, no one brought the religion to Abraham. Abraham was seeking the truth. He knew that there was something bigger that exists, a creator bigger than some idol, than some little trophy that his culture was seeking after. And he did not want that. He didn't want to believe that some little sculpture was a god. But let me go back a little bit. So we know that, and this is not to encourage racism. This is not to encourage any kind of discrimination. This is just knowledge. You have to understand the past in order to understand the present. Okay, so my version of this facts are, we all know that we had conquerors in this world that wanted to conquer lands, different lands. Usually people of another race, of another tribe, of race completely from our own. And those people wanted to always be different. They consider themselves different from the rest. This is why those people of the other race, of a white race, of a European white race, wanted to be distinguished from the rest of us because they knew they were different than everyone else. And this group of people was created from albinos. They came from us. They were born from us, but there was a gene mutation. Okay, you know that mutation is change, right? So there was a process of mutation taking place, which happens every day. Some we can witness with our eyes and some we can't. But scientifically, it's a fact that every day of our lives, there's some kind of gene mutation taking place in some form or fashion. Whether it's that you used to could eat strawberries and you no longer can eat strawberries because now you're allergic to strawberries. That is a gene mutation. Okay? Okay, so, but you have gene mutations on a very small scale and you have a gene mutation on a very large scale. Okay, so the mutation is the change. So these albinos were a gene mutation from the melanated people. Okay, so the original people, we started in Africa, we migrated to Europe, to the Middle East, to Asia, and all these lands around the world, hundreds of thousands of years ago. I want to go back as far as maybe 3, 4, 500,000 years ago. Okay, uh, and the group that became later white, as we know it to be, as they recognize themselves as white, this group were albinos. How did they become albinos? They were in living in Europe. They had already lived there a couple thousands of years maybe, and those melanated ones who had their babies had albino babies, some of them. And those albino children mated with other albino children like them because they were different, okay? And they considered themselves different, and they were different. But at the same time as the outside reflects the change, the gene mutation, also there's a gene mutation within. Your thinking process, the way you process things, somewhat different than the general population of melanated people. Okay, and in that fact, there's what many recognize as greed. Today, we symbolize this as greed. Some may symbolize it as a desire, a strong desire for conquering, but just to break it down, this recognizes greed. Okay, does that mean that you're greedy because you want success today in today's world? Or does that mean that you're greedy? Technically, maybe, and maybe it's a bad thing, maybe it's not such a bad thing, right? But technically, there's this desire, a strong desire to seek, okay? So those mutated individuals carry this gene mutation of this desire, this strong urge to seek after. Okay, it's the best way I could describe it. These individuals later on, and I can't give you exact timeline, but I can tell you to fast forward a little bit later on, more to the future a little bit, and those same people settled in areas of Europe. Oh, they were originally from Europe, but they kept to themselves, and they formed their own group, their own clan, their own culture. They were in the coldest parts of Europe and near Russia, Caucasus Mountains of Europe, and those areas, very freezing, under zero, below zero, negative freezing zones. So it was hard to keep vegetation in those lands. So they always sought for better lands where they can find more food, right? They survived with grains and these type of things, but they always seek for land. And you know this because if you fast forward to the New World, America, as you can know, this is what they're accustomed to, seeking for new land, searching for a better way, right? So this is something within them. But the first of those people going back to those couple 100,000 years ago, not 2,000, but 200,000 years back, 300,000 years back, those people, you had several tribes of them. Just like with African or anyone else, there's several tribes. So you have tribes from different areas of Europe, of Eastern Europe. These group of people used to bum rush, or should I say, they didn't have the military form yet at that time. But in those times, they used to like scavengers. They'd go from land to land, like areas like the like Iran. In those times, they were not called Iran. In those times, it was called the I can't remember the name of Iran during biblical times, but I'm speaking right now before biblical times. But from that time to the biblical times, those areas was called the it'll come back to me. But anyway, the land, or what we call today Iran and Iraq, those areas, they settled in those areas, but they would always be, the locals would not like them there because they would come and steal from the locals, okay? And it was like scavengers. They would come in the night, creep in the night, and steal their foods and steal their things. So the locals were always on the lookout for them, keep them away, you know? They were like scavengers. And mind you, this may be referring to a particular tribe of them. It may not be all of them. Like I said, they also came from different tribes. And tribes meaning different lineages, just like we call ourselves the family of the Williams and the family of the Thomas and the family. Okay, well, those times they went by tribes, and the tribes are even more stronger than just going by a certain family, because the tribes were lineage that goes way back. So they come from certain lineage, this group of people of European descent. And these people, they, like I said, some of them got away with mixing in with the locals, and some of them got away with learning the language of the locals in those lands and becoming part of the culture. But as a whole, most of them got killed off and ran off from, the locals would run them off the land. Okay, fast forward just somewhat, and moving to the time of the supremacy, because see, these people, they built themselves, they were forming into this like-mindedness, that they consider themselves better, unique, and different than the rest of the melanated people. And they were no longer melanated because they were born from albinos. They would just seek to partner with their own kind and have their own children. Okay, so this is a particular tribe. Right now, I don't know the name of this tribe, but now these groups of people, like I said, they settled in those areas. Some of them, some sporadically, like in Iran and Iraq and those lands, and even some areas of Israel, and some areas spread out, little spurts of them. And through time, some of them blended in with the locals, and because the locals were mild people, mild nature, so and generally the locals, some of them, accepted them within their circle. But as a whole, the country did not like them. So fast forward maybe a few thousand years later, after they became stronger and formed their own politics, okay? That's what made them strong. They formed their own politics. And, then you're talking about Western European and Eastern European. So let's focus on the Eastern European, because you have some of them migrated to the Western European, but that's a whole different story. But these particular tribes were from the Eastern European. Okay, as I said, they migrated from the Caucasus Mountains and some other areas close to Russia. Okay, and some settled in Russia and all those areas. However, these people, later on, as they settled in Rome and those areas of Greece, they formed their own politics, okay? Starting out with the Western Europeans, they were strong in politics, like the Romans. So I'm going to fast forward a few thousand years later, when Abraham was born in the year 3500 BC, before Christ. And during that time, there was a lot of idolatry in the lands. But who brought the idolatry were the foreigners. Who were the foreigners of the land? These very Eastern Europeans and Western Europeans from Rome were the foreigners of the land. As I said, everybody sought to go to Egypt. That was the world superpower at the time. With the Suez Canal and all the richness, Greeks and French and everyone settled in Egypt. And you had pharaohs. And the pharaohs were not mean, they were not wicked. They were of a nature of people that were mild-mannered. It's only the last pharaoh that was different, that was rebellious. But that's because he had the influence of these very same people. Because see, that last pharaoh, from birth to the time he was coming up, he grew up among these people in his land, surrounded in his culture. It's kind of like, when you become friends with someone of a unique background, And depending if that person has good manners and good intentions, that'll rub off on you. Well, in this case, they didn't have good manners. They were that rebellious type, and they rubbed off on the Pharaoh, that last Pharaoh. So he grew up with the knowledge of these people and the liking of those particular unique people. Okay, and and when he grew up, he was a mean Pharaoh. No other Pharaoh before him was like him. He was mean. He was different. He abused things like alcohol, and he learned a lot of things from these foreign Greeks, albino, no longer albino now, they call themselves white, Greeks and white Eastern Europeans. So he befriended them. They would have orgies and bring him handmaidens from Greece. These now remember now no longer is Greece and those areas of melanated people. Now they're all whitewashed with these people who took over the lands of Greece and Rome and all these areas. So these are the people that were overpowering, because these were the people that have that strong desire to seek and conquer. Okay. Now, these people formed their own military in Rome, and they also never forgot their brethren in Eastern Europe, because now remember they settled thousands of years in Rome, and they never forgotten about their brethren in Eastern Europe, okay, who were a little weaker group. They were not as keen to form a politic group or political system like Rome was. So these of the group that were settled in Rome, who were citizens of Rome by now, they were taking over the world. They wanted to take over the world, conquer the world, land by land by land, bum rushing lands, different countries, and taking what they could and naming that land theirs, proclaiming it to be theirs, setting laws and politics in those lands, taking over the school system and the government that ruled over the people. They were the ones, and by now they were speaking Latin. Rome is a Latin. They formed their own language after a few thousands of years, known as Latin. So, Rome was very fast at its campaign to take over lands. So Rome had formed what they recognized themselves as white supremacists. They considered themselves superior to the rest of the world, and felt like they can take whatever they want. And that's the mentality that these people had. Remember, they originated from this gene mutation of albinos. And like I said, over thousands of years, it just became what they call themselves, white. Okay. But like I said, they have their brethren from thousands of years before in Eastern Europe. And now these are the ones settled in Rome and the Western Europe. Okay. They might be just slightly different in mentality from the Eastern Europe, but not too different, because those are their brethren. So these are thousands and hundred thousands of years later. I'm fast forwarding to Abraham time. So in 3500 BC, Abraham, as a young adult, he knows he's next to become this. It was like this great thing in his culture. Abraham was like in the areas of, I believe, like Abraham's family migrated from Iraq, which they call Babylonia in those times, and to the areas of Sudan, what we call Sudan now, and settled in those areas, Iran. And Abraham was melanated man, because the melanated people were the original people of these lands. Okay, so Abraham just knew he did not want to follow his father's footsteps, into becoming this idol worshiper, or this lead top guy in the idol worship industry, I guess. So he went out to the mountains, sat on the mountains, and spoke to the universe and said, if there is a creator, I know you're out there, give me a sign. Okay? He just refused to believe that this little idol, this little sculpture was a god or a creator of him or anything around that exists. He refused to believe that, and he was right. So he got a response from God. And see, at that time, there was no book, nothing written. It was given to him. God answered him. God talked to him as he sat on the mountain. God talked to him. He heard, in, I don't know if it's audio in a voice or spiritually, but God talked to him. So you see, I'm going to fast forward now to Moses, which was not far from that time. It was somewhere around that time. Now that God knows that mankind seeks for his help, God is now sending his prophet, Moses, who was birthed, right, in Egypt, right? Originally, I believe, from Egypt. So his mother was Egyptian, right? If I'm not mistaken. And so, or is it that he was Egyptian? But I know that Moses was, yeah, I think he belonged to the Egyptian people. And you can check me on that if I'm wrong. But anyways, Moses was a prophet from God. Because see, God, when he chooses his prophets, he's choosing from a lineage. Remember, these are coming from the 12 Israelites. Moses is one of the Israelites. Remember, there's 12 tribes of Jacob. I hadn't mentioned Jacob, but if you know the story, you know that the 12 tribes were the descendants of Jacob. Because see, God made a promise to Jacob long before this. And the tribes are the children of each family member of each descendant. That's what they're calling tribe. Just like I said, if I have children and my children have children and my children has and those children have children, then each generation is a tribe from me. And then you have the tribe of my sister, the tribe of my brother, the tribe, and all their children. Those are tribes. So if there's 12 children, you know, and Jacob had 12 children, then each one of those children and their children are tribe of that particular tribe 1, tribe 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 children, and all their children, and they each come from one lineage, one parent, right? Okay, so I want you to understand tribe. So, where was I? Okay, these are tribes, 12 tribes, right? So, Abraham was from a particular tribe too. And I will tell you in another video what tribe, but he was from a particular tribe as well. However, I'm going to fast forward. Okay, I'm skipping a lot in the timeline, but I'm going to fast forward just to bring you to current times and about Nipsey Hussle, okay? So basically what happens is Abraham, like I said, he refused to worship idols. And God spoke to him, so now he knows there is a creator bigger than these idols and bigger than anything that exists. And we can never see the creator with our own eyes, right? Okay, but God gave him the sign, who we refer to as God, creator, okay, of the universe, of the earth. Not these, you see, the English is a very complicated language because the English did not exist in those times. The English language was born as of the time of Shakespeare, much later. Okay, like in what, the 1400s, 1300s. English was created, then developed in that time, much later. I'm talking right now, 3500 BC, during the time of Abraham. So English didn't even exist, okay? So those languages were many languages of these areas of the Middle East and Israel, Jerusalem, Iraq, all those areas in Africa. Okay, so the 12 tribes had spread out through those lands, Abraham being one of those tribes. You see, because God's prophet only came from the most reliable tribe of them. These 12 tribes, they were truthful and dedicated to God. But as time goes on, generation after generation, some tribes became corrupted. And in fact, all of them became somewhat corrupted. But there's one tribe that did not become corrupted like the rest of them, and that was the tribe of Levi. But they will not talk to you about the tribe of Levi. They will tell you that Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. Don't you think that's an agenda in itself to say that Jesus is the tribe of Judah? When Judah's priest was Judas was a bad guy, and Jesus does not come from a line of wicked people. Okay, as I said, way back, these all were good people, good tribes. But like I said, later on in the future, many generations became corrupted by who? The foreigners. Who were the foreigners? Those descendants of those albinos from hundred thousands of years back. And I fast forwarded to Abraham time, to the future, Abraham time being 3500 BC. Okay, so I don't want to lose you. I'm a little scattered with this information that I've been holding within for years. And next time I promise to have a video with a more educated, more structural form of this message. However, so what happens is there's a lot of warfare in Egypt. You know, you heard of King Alexander, you heard of Cleopatra. Everybody wants to take over Egypt. The French, everybody. So that's why it's not a surprise why you see today Egyptians, a lot of them are mixed, they look white because they're mixed with French, they're mixed with the albino descendants of the Greeks, that's those that settled in Greece and now are Greeks. But as we know, the original people of Greece were melanated. Okay, you can still find some of the native people in Greece and those areas, okay? Now, who originated in Africa, because Africa is the only continent where the human being came from, okay, the mankind, okay. There were others that existed, that's a whole different video, way before mankind. We are mankind, okay. Anyhow, so what happens is the politics that Rome had formed was this militant military and proclaimed itself government of the world. I mean, think about that. Rome proclaimed itself. Nobody gave a throne or reigned Rome to their position that they proclaimed for themselves. It's as if I say, you know what? I am the queen today. I'm the queen of all of you, proclaiming myself to be queen over all of you, and I reign over all of you. That's what Rome did, pretty much. It proclaimed itself the government, made itself the government through the fact that they bum rushed people's land, took over what they had, and made it their land. Okay, so that's what Rome was known for. So Rome had built itself a military over years and hundreds of years, and took over a lot of the knowledge that the natives had left behind, whether they killed them off, whether they killed the natives of Rome and Greeks who were melanated off and took their knowledge for themselves and proclaimed it for themselves. And then we believe that, you know, these people who are looking white Romans and looking white Greeks and looking white, when they stole the information that was already there, the knowledge that was already there from the native melanated people. Okay, well, anyhow, all that took place before religion was known to mankind, before Abraham was born. But now, like, I'm here talking about when Abraham is an adult now, okay? Fast forwarding to 3500 BC, before Christ. So what happens is, so God sends Moses to help the Israelites. Some rebelled, gave Moses a very hard time. So Moses was a little insecure about his speech impediment. God allowed him to have Aaron as, you know, as his right-hand man, pretty much. And Aaron, his brother, and him together went to confront the Pharaoh and this wicked Pharaoh of that time. Like I said, this was the only wicked Pharaoh, which was the last of the pharaohs. Any pharaohs before that were not this wicked. Why was this last Pharaoh wicked? Well, I told you he grew up in a corrupted time when the foreigners of these European countries who happened to be descendants of these albinos who have already settled in Greece and Rome and other European countries. Okay, and like I said, not all of the Europeans came from this wicked group. They originated from this wicked group, but not all of them thought like this wicked group. This wicked group of descendants of these albinos were wicked in reality, and they would steal, they were scavengers, and now they've made themselves, they've elevated themselves later on, right? They formed the politics. They're westernized. They were a little different than their Eastern counterparts. right, from Eastern Europe. So, but the Eastern Europe's needed help from the Western Europe. So Rome allied with Eastern Europeans. You might recognize some of these as Ashkenazi Jews. And see, that's another topic. The Jews itself, when they called themselves Jews, they were already white skinned. They were already whitewashed. Because see, originally, I'm going to tell you something that's just going to shock you. Jewish or Jews is not a religion. Jews is a tribe of people from Judah. But these people of Eastern European who were whitewashed, who were descended from the albinos, their ancestors way back of the albinos that settled in Europe and the Caucasus Mountains and those areas, these descendants that then later on settled in Rome for many thousands of years, making them just slightly different than their counterparts, brethren in Eastern Europe, but they were still the same bloodline. But like everything else, they've migrated into different tribes, right, over thousands of years. But this group had formed a strong army, became government of Rome, and the Romans would send spies to the temples. This is when they first learned that there was a religion. They didn't know anything about religion of God. They didn't know anything about. They went to spy. What happened? They went to spy on the Israelites in the temple. Okay. How did they come to spy on the Israelites in the temple? Because they knew only through Moses, from, spying on Moses, spying on the people of the temple. That's how they come to know that there is this religion. And it wasn't written, but it was in book form, right? Because now it went from the spiritual knowledge to paper so that it can help others to learn the religion, right? It wasn't originated in paper, but it was placed on tablet because God placed the commandments on a tablet for Moses to share with the Israelites, right? Those to turn them back from their wicked ways, turn them away from their wicked ways because they were corrupted. Why were they corrupted? Because they were growing up and these generations were becoming corrupted. Just like today, we have many generations become more corrupted than the previous generation and so forth. Same thing back then. So now God's religion is in paper, in book form, right? Because the reason it was in book form was because they had to put it in book form to help the masses. But at the same time, they were risking the fact that it'll get in the wrong hands. And that's exactly what happened. So now you have the government of Rome spying on these Israelites, want to know what they're bowing down to, what's the ritual that they're forming in those temples. And mind you, the word ritual is not a bad word. Rituals can be very good. Don't be scared of the word ritual because you've been programmed, trained in our culture to be scared of the word rituals. Now, you have to consider the source. Who tells you these things? Where they originate from? Where do these people that tell you these things to put a fear in you originate from? And then you'll know that you have to understand for yourself and research for yourself. Okay? If I'm only given information from my oppressor, then I should be wary that this information might be limited or might be geared to lead me somewhat mixed with lies and truth at the same time, but formed in a way to lead me to where they want me to go, right? So I have to think outside the box and do some of my own research. That's how we should be thinking. Okay, so basically, like I said, so the government of Rome sent spies to the temples. Some of these spies became part of the temple. I'm going to use the word church because you are more familiar with the word church. So instead of using temple, I'm going to use the word church. So these Israelites had their church. They used to worship God, worship the Creator, show respect to the Creator in their church, because they come from the lineage, the descendants of Jacob. Okay, and so this last generation, when they're called the Israelites, had become corrupted. You still had some good people, just like any other generation. You have a great masses of good people, but then you have those big masses of bad people who are just corrupted and want to indulge in crazy things. And that's what was going on. And you have to remove your thinking from today's time where it's acceptable to be dysfunctional, where it's acceptable to be extremist and indifferent, where it's acceptable. In those times, respect was very important. And respect also meant discipline and manners. Manners was a good thing. It wasn't a bad thing, or it didn't mean you were stupid. It was very highly sought. Respect, manners, the lineage of people that you come from just kind of help people to understand the respect that your lineage carries, you know, the track record that your lineage of people carry, okay? We're not going to try to form that and be discriminatory because we're putting our mind, today's mind, to assess and think we're going to discriminate. That, oh, I'm so glad we're no longer like that. We can't do that. We can't take two different timelines and say, well, let's not do that. Let's just appreciate and understand the time that they were in, okay? Where it was beautiful to have manners and respect and humility. Okay, so these Roman spies became part of the temples, the church, learned the language of the Israelites, became part of the culture. Those who were partaked in the temple and those who were outside of the temple with the locals and blended in, had married with the locals, had children with the locals. So now you have mixtures in families, right? Mixtures among the tribes, right? Okay. And the aim was always to take over the land, conquer Egypt. Okay. So what happens is they were coming close to succeeding. The signs were there from the time of Moses. And even there were some high priests in the temple who were corrupted. It doesn't mean that being a high priest is a corrupted level to be in. It just means that their hearts, their intentions were bad. They were paid by Rome under the table, and they kept the hush-hush money and accepted money from Rome, and of course became informants of Rome. The very same locals who were part of the temple. So it's not that the Israelites were bad originally. It's not that the religion of what today we call Judaism was bad. But I will say it became bad when it was called Judaism. Because see, no religion of God has a name. And that brings the point to why people become atheists, because they're confused, and they have every right to be confused, but you're only going to be confused because you have not done your homework. You have not done your research outside of the source from the oppressors. You have to seek other sources outside of the very oppressors that's giving you their books. Okay, and you can connect the dots with the same information you're given here, and connect it with some information from outside sources and different historical sources over time, and put it together and connect the dots. Okay. Anyhow, so the government of Rome was sending spies. So a lot of these Romans were becoming part of the local system, marrying into the locals' families and having children with them. And the same thing was going on a higher scale. The Pharaoh, who was the last Pharaoh, was the mean Pharaoh, the wicked Pharaoh, was also having orgies because the Greeks were sending Greek maidens to the Pharaoh as a gift. They would have orgies and have babies with the pharaohs. The agenda was to take over Egypt. So what do you think they were doing that? That was one way of conquering Egypt, by making children with the pharaohs so that they can inherit some part of that wealth from Egypt. That goes back to why you see England and the royals in Europe all came about. They were part of this descendant, this lineage of people who mixed and had orgies with the pharaohs, had children with the pharaoh, and inherited part of the wealth from Egypt and took it with them to Europe, right? And England, those areas, okay? But they originally stole that from Egypt. right? By having children with the Pharaoh and inheriting this land and taking it to Europe. Okay, taking the wealth through their names of who they were related to the affiliated with the Pharaoh, taking it back for themselves to Europe. It's like if I was born of, it's as if my grandfather was a Pharaoh and I was born of that lineage, but I'm mixed with my European albino relatives, and now I mix one half of the albino descendants and one half of the local melanated people from the Pharaoh, and now I go to Europe and I have my own kingdom in Europe. But that I originally took that from Egypt because in my blood runs some of the Pharaoh's blood and some of the European blood. And then I have more children, or my children have children in Europe, and they whitewash everything and only marry white. And that's how you have only white royals, right? But the original people they took it from was to the Pharaoh. How did they get to do that? Because the last Pharaoh was corrupted. Had the last Pharaoh not been corrupted, that would never happen. But that's how you can win a war. Another method of winning a silent war is through corruption. Corrupting the people, right? So the Pharaoh was corrupted. By who? The foreigners. Not as an adult. It started from when he was a young boy. Playing among them, thinking like them, changing, getting away from his roots completely, and then becoming a corrupted adult. Okay? So he wanted to be the God, right? He wanted to be the God. But see, a lot of people become atheists because they think, oh, see, religion is a lie. Well, half of that is true and half of that is not true. I know what you're saying, but you have to understand what you're saying. What you're trying to say is that you see that Egypt, when you look in Egypt, the walls have these scriptures, calligraphy from millions of years before, way before Abraham, way before any of that. And it has on the walls of Egypt these proofs that there's a virgin birth, there's all these things that took place. And a lot of people claim, oh, I'm atheist now because, see, this was way before Jesus. Well, that's not a good enough reason to become atheist, because if anything, that should make you more of a believer, because that's confirming and affirming that this is to happen in the future. Even though it's a million years ago that it was written on the walls, it's affirming that it will happen, it's to come in the future, and it did come to pass. That's what that's saying. Okay. However, yes, another part of that is that the politics of Rome, because like I said, the Rome is the world's government. They proclaimed themselves world government through stealing people's land. Okay. So they became allied with the Eastern Europeans who were being killed off constantly by the Persians. That was the name of the country of Iran in those times, Persia. Okay. Which Persia had their own religion as well. I think it was called Restorian, and they were believed to be fire worshippers, but I think there's some loss in translation. I don't think it's intended to be fire worshippers. I think that's the English mindset that views anything that you give high respect and bow down to as a worship. Just because you bow down to something or someone does not mean you're worshiping that thing. It could very well just mean respect, just like the Asian bow down is respect. It doesn't mean they're worshiping me if they bow down to me, you know? Worshiping would mean if they expect some kind of power from me to do something, and then just begging me and asking me and praying to me, then that would be worshiping me. But just simply bowing down, giving respect, no, you have to understand the mindset and you have to understand the time that they were in. Respect was highly regarded. So it's like today, people don't have a lot of respect. People can walk in somewhere without greeting anyone. You have some people that greet, some people that don't. Well, in those times, for example, a person that doesn't show respect comes from a bad tribe of people, a bad lineage of people. And don't say, well, gosh, I'm glad I didn't live in those times, because, see, you may have well appreciated living in that time. You can't mix the two different times of today and that time. we are living in a corrupted time. We're trying to make the best of these times, right? The best way that we can today. But in those, we still have to respect the ancient times for what they were and what they stood for. Okay, so anyhow, it started out with white supremacy, conquering lands, right? These descendants of these albinos who became and called themselves white or white Europeans, okay, from East and West Europe. And they were not the original people of those lands, but they settled there and became and owned and took over those lands, right? So anyhow, these people, when they come to find out what these Israelites were doing in the temple, and like I said, anytime they want to take over something, they become part of that culture. And that's what they did for thousands of years before that, before religion, before Abraham. They became part of Egypt, right? Okay, they mixed with the locals, okay? And that's why when Abraham was a kid and coming up, there was so much idol worshiping because the foreigners had brought in all that idolatry. The descendants of these albinos who were now calling themselves white brought all that idolatry from Europe and taught the locals. Why did they do that? They had an agenda. They wanted to corrupt the locals, because with corruption, then they can take over things. Then they can mix in with them and have babies with their pharaohs, right? So that's kind of like what we're doing today too, right? Every time you turn on the TVs, all this more and more corruption. It's like, haven't we had enough? There's more and more, and the more corruption that is presented to us, the more acceptable we are of the previous corruption. Okay, that's what they were doing then too, except it wasn't on television. They were doing this like all around you. You didn't have to sit and learn it. You were among it constantly. We're among it now, but first it's presented to us on television and music, the corruption, and then we take it as part of our own. Some of us don't. And then those that don't, they try to keep silent because you're frowned upon because you don't accept this or that. Okay, well, now in those times, it was becoming widely common, the corruption. You see, all the humble prophets, like the last noble prophet was Samuel. So you have Abraham, who talked to God. He wasn't given anything written to show the people, because he's the first to talk to God. He's the reason why God then later start to send prophets to help the Israelites, because God saw that we wanted help. We asked for it because Abraham was the first to ask. Thanks to Abraham, right? We became and learned about the Creator. If it wasn't for Abraham, and if there was no other like Abraham, we would have never had the privilege to learn or know anything about the Creator. Okay, so anyhow, so what happens is when they learn about this religion of God, and I say religion of God because I'm not talking about man-made religion. You see, what is man-made religion? Man-made religion is they take some of the truth, mix it with a lie, with an agenda to lead you where they want to lead you to. Those are the oppressors that do that. They always have an agenda. Today, oppressors don't have to be, they don't look a certain way. But there's this system that they created that no matter what color you are, if you follow that system of corruption, you yourself are an oppressor, right? So we have that today. We have this system, some are calling the Illuminati system. Now, Illuminati itself is a good word. It means enlightened one. So see, they took this word for themselves. We're the enlightened ones, the illuminated ones. They took that word for themselves, these corrupted foreigners. Those groups of them that were part of the politics. Now remember, just like today, you have people in politics, you have people that are locals that are not into politics. You had all that back then. So the people that were of the politics were the people of the government of Rome and so forth, and they call themselves the illuminated ones. They created a system of Illuminati, is what we're referring to it. There's many other terms, but I'm choosing to say Illuminati system. Okay, Illuminati is not this hocus pocus. No, it's a system. It's like if I say Take A, then B, then C, and then make it C, D, E. After you get the E, go back to A and B, and then go to F. As elementary as that sounds, that in itself is a system. I just gave you a pattern, a blueprint of how I want you to travel or how I want you to conduct something. That is a system, okay? If I say, follow these steps or instructions, that is a system. So the Illuminati system is a system created by those who call themselves the illuminated ones. And the goal was to run everything, control your mind. So yes, when they bumped into the religion of the Israelites, well, the religion of God, the Creator, and there are Israelites who always follow their rituals and respect to their Creator. As I said, they were born from their ancestor Jacob. They follow the respect factors and the mannerisms that they're supposed to uphold, right? And the Creator is upholding His promise to them that He made a covenant with Jacob long before. And these are the children of Jacob's 12 original children. And they each form a tribe. That's a lineage, a tribe or lineage, same thing. So now this particular lineage in the temples are being investigated by the Romans. And the Romans were paying them under the table for information. And some of them accepted the money, right? Because they needed money or they felt they needed money. And they betrayed some of the temple, some of the church people and were being informants to the Romans. That's how the religion got stolen from them. Because now the Romans are learning the religion, they're learning the language, right? They learned the Hebrew language. And these people's original language was not Hebrew. Hebrew is the international language, the language that you could speak to all the local countries or the nearby countries that border Egypt. But that was not the local language. Every country had its local language, and then Hebrew was the international trading language. Just like everyone here has their own language, and then you speak correct English or standard English to trade and to do business with, right? Okay, that's how Hebrew was. So the original scriptures of God's scriptures, it was given in Hebrew, but it doesn't mean that the people were originally of a Hebrew descent. It's just Hebrew is the international language because many tribes had different languages also, right? From migration, settling in different areas, different lands. So in order to understand, the language of Hebrew is given so that everyone can understand because everybody spoke Hebrew, whether it be their second language or third language. Okay, so now the Romans used the religion to change up a lot of things. They formed the Catholic Church, the original Catholic Church. It doesn't mean that the Catholic Church is wrong. It just means that you can see footprints of the Romans in the Catholic Church. You can see where they changed. They formed a blueprint and they changed up some things. There's at least 80%, 90% facts, truth, but they twist and turn some things and play with words. The translators did, and to change the direction of how they wanted the people to go. The more authentic of them is the oldest Bible, the more authentic of them. Coming to the newer ones, a lot of things are lost in translation, you know. It's like if I say backside. In the West Indies, backside is Old English for the back, the butt. But if you tell an American on the backside, they think it's of the backside of something because that's where it originated from, being the backside of something, where it's the backside of the chair, the backside of the curtain. But in a casual way, when Caribbeans say your backside, they mean your backside. They don't mean your back. They usually say your backside, meaning your butt. It came to that because I'm sure along the way somebody was referring to the butt. But originally, it just means the backside, just like it sounds, the backside of things. So it's very easy for words to change their meaning over time, right? We do it all the time. That's why people can't keep up, because American English changes meaning over time, more so than English from England. Okay, so as I said, the English language is a baby language, probably about 500 years old, 400 or 500 years old. That's it. Okay, so anyhow, and a lot of things get lost in translation with English. If you can learn the language of Hebrew and see even the original language of Hebrew, the original ancient language of Hebrew is lost, and people mostly speak a different dialect of Hebrew, right? Okay, just like you don't speak Old English, but you speak more of a modern American English, which is somewhat different than the English from Britain English. Even the modern England English, British English, is different than, some words are different than the American modern English. So things can get lost in translation, which is why it's important, if you kept the original text for the original language and learn the meaning and the understanding of the original language, you wouldn't lose meaning in a perfect world. Okay, however, this agenda, now I'm going to connect this to Nipsey Hussle. Okay, the reason why, in my hypothesis, is that they don't want people to know that the original of anything was black. And even though many people have come to find this out, whether through their own research before the internet, and then once the internet came into play back in the 80s and more so in the 90s, actually the internet came into play in the 90s. In the 80s we had intranet, but once internet was like a super highway and people were putting all kind of information on there, people were understanding and learning a lot just from the internet alone, and they couldn't stop it. Now they've created software where they can control a lot of that. But even though it's too late to take away the knowledge you gained, they can control you through dysfunction and corruption. Okay, you're probably thinking, well, no, people cause their own corruption. Yeah, you have some truth in that. But the corruption had to be put out there originally. For you to take a corruption and run with it, it had to be presented to you first, right? Or you had to learn it from someone first. You're not born with corruption. That's another thing. They want you to believe you're born of original sin. Who told you that? The oppressor? God didn't tell you that. You're not born of original sin. The reason it's necessary for them to make you believe that you're born of original sin, so that you can always say, I can never do right. And if I fail, I could just keep getting back up, which you should. Always keep getting back up. But can you imagine if everything was another way? Like, we were always told that we should achieve better and we are not born of original sin. Well, you can't imagine, because you can only imagine from your experience. And your experience tells you that you fell and picked yourself back up a million times. And if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't be here, or you wouldn't be this strong today. That's okay. That's fine. That's important. That's good. But had we lived with a different upbringing, in a different mindset, we would have been completely different than what we are right now. So you can't say that this is the best way. You can only say that there's so many perspectives to everything, right? And this is one. Okay. So what I want to say is, you see, even right now with Ethiopia being one of the poorest countries, in Eritrea, poorest how? Poorest in economics. But whose economics? Political economics. Because see, all of Africa is rich in soil and resources. But poor would come in because the general population don't have control of those resources. Now we're talking poor because of that. Not because the land or the continent of Africa is poor, because that is not true. If that was the case, then why would we have cars today if Africa was not rich in resources? Because of Africa, we have cars, we have cell phones, many more than that. There's so much resources that they take from Africa and manufacture in Asia and then trade it to the rest of the world. Wouldn't it be much nicer if we can just keep the resources we have in Africa, take the Asians and everybody else to come work in Africa, build the manufacturing companies in Africa? But see, it's not as easy as it sounds, because there are some gatekeepers of this evil doers who are descendants of these albinos who took over, like I said, conquer thousands of years back, lands and pieces of Africa. And they have this contract that no one can take it away for some period of time. And they renew that contract, I believe, every so often, which is the case with South Africa and Europe owning South Africa for themselves. They've dissected Africa a long time ago in colonialism, which is why Africa looks the way it looks. You know, many areas of Africa is just dirt, dirt, dirt. It's not like modernized like how we have today with sidewalks, and there's areas like that. But that's just because, you know, they hadn't built. It takes time to build. Not even these lands started out with sidewalks. We came here and we built. Well, South Africa, they have went there and built because they took ownership of South Africa. However, there's areas of Africa that they have not took over, but they have dissected, ripped apart, and took what they wanted from it in times in the past, like uranium and other resources. From the French to the Germans to the Italians to Portuguese, you know, every whitewashed European has taken over, taken and stole from Africa over hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, right? Okay, so what I want to say, Nipsey Hussle, being a melanated man, being a black man, and see, black is limited. Black is beautiful, black is good, but in times in the past, just saying black was limited. Just like you say white is limited. It means forget about your history, forget about who you are. Just you're black, just you're white. That's what the politics did. They renamed people's, they made up what was called race and called people black, white, and that's it. Forget about where you originally came from, your history or anything. This is the new world and this is what you are here. That's what they did. That's what politics did as of the transatlantic slavery. Now, about this transatlantic slavery, the intention was not to treat people like animals, but the Portuguese abused a lot of the, slaves. But you see, the thing is, they didn't bring all those millions of slaves from Africa. Do you really believe that? Christopher Columbus said in his own diary that the Atlantic was the roughest sea, that he would not take another trip through the Atlantic, but maybe the Pacific, because he had done some research and saw that the Pacific was a calmer sea. But before he could live to do that, he died. And who took over was another conqueror, explorer, conqueror. And I think his name was Ferdinand. I think he lived to do the travel through the Pacific, because the goal was to see if there was a shorter route from the Pacific to the Atlantic without having to go all the way around the world. They could just have ships come through, cut through the two continents, North and South America, through Central America. And that's what happened. That's how the Canal of Panama was built later on, just 100 years ago. That's how, basically what I want to say with that is, what was I going with that? Anyhow, let me go back to what I was trying to say about Nipsey Hussle. Nipsey Hussle being a black man, a melanated man, a man of color, from Africa, with the mindset that he can relate to everyone in America at every level, and keen not to have forgotten his culture, even though he wasn't raised in Africa. He just come to really, really understand his people when he was 18. Okay? That, not being embarrassed of who he is and who he was, that scared those people working the back scene, the Illuminati people. Who are the Illuminati? These descendants. And see, you could be melanated and be part of the Illuminati system.
if you don't know your history. If you follow that system, remember, it's a system. As I said, it was already established from the time of Jesus and Moses. The Romans has established that system, and it's still in place. You know, the times of the mafia in 1930s and 20s, they went from the streets to the banks. So that's a system that was created, and they're following it, and that's their goal. But I'm going to pick up, this is a very long video. I'm going to try to pick up on this later.